I want to welcome you all on behalf of the University of Florida IFAS Extension Polk County. Welcome to our Gardening and Landscaping Lunch and Learn today. This Lunch and Learn is sponsored by City of Lakeland Water Utilities. So thank you, City of Lakeland, for sponsoring this Lunch and Learn. All right, just a few things before we get started with the presentation. Want to let you know our webinar team consists often of Ann Yazalana. She's our residential horticulture agent and master gardener volunteer coordinator. I'm Julie Shelb. I'm the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program Coordinator. We also have 2 master gardener volunteers that are helping us in person today, and we have 2 master gardener volunteers that are helping online. So Sue and Marcia are available online if you have any questions online. We are an equal opportunity institution, so if you believe you have been subjected to discrimination in any of our programs or any USDA program, please feel free to file a complaint with the USDA. You can do so by completing the form online at usda.gov. You can also call them at 866-632-9992, or you can write a letter addressed to the USDA. But again, we are an equal opportunity institution. So today we're going to talk about proper pruning. It's almost that time of year for lots of pruning, so I think this is a very appropriate topic. So today we're going to look, before we get into proper pruning, Brittany's going to share with us some water conservation opportunities with the City of Lakeland Water Utilities. Then we're going to talk about Florida friendly landscaping. Then we'll get into some topics about pruning. Why do we want to prune? What are some proper pruning cuts, especially related to specific plants, looking at trees, shrubs, some ornamental grasses, your palm trees, and even what to do, a little bit of pruning regarding your perennials and your annuals. And then we'll briefly discuss some maintenance and care tips on your pruning tools. And so now I'll have Brittany step up.
Good afternoon. It is afternoon now. Thank you guys so much for being here. I do really appreciate your attendance. Conservation opportunities that the Water Utilities Department offers. Any water utilities like in Polk County has the same programs for the most part. So if you're not here in the City of Lakeland, if you pay water to like Polk County, they offer these as well. So just make sure you reach out to them for that information. The toilet rebates are one of our big ones that we're trying to get people to take or to do. So if you have a toilet that is dated pre-1994 and you want to get it replaced, let me know. You can contact me, give me a phone call or email. There's information on the website as well, but there's an application to fill out. There's some pictures I don't need you to take, but you get $100 rebate. So it's really not a bad deal. Please take advantage of it. If you know of anyone even that has, an older home that needs to get some updating done, let them know about the program, because we're definitely wanting people to get those higher volume toilets replaced. We get basically 3.5 gallons per flush or more is the higher volume. We want you to get a 1.28 water sense labeled toilet. So that's where that $100 rebate comes into play. Conservation kits we have for free. So if that is something that you're interested in, and you haven't previously got one before, let me know on that as well. There's a form online you can fill out, or you can just email, call. You get 2 shower heads, sink aerators, some toilet tablets to test and see if your toilet has a leak. So maybe you can get it replaced if you need to. But those are available for free. And then also smart timers, landscape irrigation evaluations. Those are for our higher end like users, those who use like 20,000 gallons a month or more. A lot of that water is going into irrigation. So if that is something that you have an issue with and you want to get some help on that, please let me know as well. I definitely can hook you up. We do a free evaluation, kind of tell you what you need to do. If the smart timer is something you're interested in, we have a rebate for that too. So if you have any questions, let me know. I did have a brochure at the table. My information's in there as well, and also information about these programs. So like I said, I'm here for you. whatever you need. I want to help you save water, so let me know. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Brittany. Thank you. Yep. And thank you, City of Lakeland Water Utilities, for being a partner with Florida Friendly Landscaping. We appreciate this partnership to help encourage residents to conserve water. Okay, so we are going to move right along here. So we're going to get started. And so today, before we get into pruning, we're going to talk about Florida Friendly Landscaping. As I mentioned, I'm the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program Coordinator. And so everything we discussed is related to Florida Friendly Landscaping. And so Florida Friendly Landscaping is made up of 9 easy to follow principles. All of these are set so that we can maintain beautiful landscapes here in Florida with our very unique climate. But in maintaining our beautiful landscapes, we can protect our environment. We can reduce our use of water, fertilizer, and pesticides to help conserve and protect our natural resources, particularly our water resources here in Florida. And so you can see the very first principle is right plant, right place. When we start with that, we have a lot less problems in the landscape. When we match plants to our site conditions, those plants are better able to thrive. They're going to be less susceptible to pest and disease problems. Next, we want to make sure that we water efficiently. So what does that mean? Making sure that we group plants by their water needs. If we have plants that are drought tolerant, put those together in a bed. If we have plants that need a little bit of supplemental irrigation, let's group those together. And let's also consider using micro irrigation in those beds. It's a type of low volume irrigation. Again, even thinking about your watering your lawn, just be conscious, adjust your irrigation seasonally. You know, we're in winter right now, so you can skip a week, water every 2 weeks instead. Plants aren't growing as actively, so they don't need as much water. So we can water efficiently. We want to make sure that we fertilize appropriately. So knowing the right time to fertilizing, knowing our plant's needs as well, and using the appropriate fertilizer. Whenever possible and appropriate, use a slow release fertilizer. That releases fertilizer over several months rather than a quick release or a soluble, which only has a 30-day response period. The slow release fertilizers mimic what naturally would occur in outdoors, where fertilizer would naturally be available to plants. Again, we want to make sure that we don't fertilize before a heavy rainstorm and that we read the label and apply it at the appropriate time. Again, we're still in winter here. It's not quite time to start fertilizing. So again, just make sure that you fertilize appropriately and research your plants and know what their needs are. We want to make sure that we utilize mulch in our landscape beds. It helps reduce weeds, it helps retain soil moisture, and it also helps reduce soil erosion. We would encourage you to use tree-based mulches, things like pine straw, pine bark, fallen leaves, melaleuca, eucalyptus, utility mulch. These are all great mulches that are going to break down and provide nutrients for your plants. What we wouldn't recommend are things like rock or crushed shell around your plants. Those are great permeable surfaces for maybe sidewalks or driveways. They allow water to filter through, but around your landscape plants, they don't actually provide any benefits. They could actually create a microclimate, create a hotter microclimate that could damage healthy and good bacteria and microbes that are in the soil. So again, those other tree-based mulches, as they break down, they're going to provide nutrients in the plants, and they have so many benefits. We want to make sure that we attract wildlife, so providing for pollinators, think about birds and other wildlife. In the way that we design our landscapes, the plants that we include, including flowering plants, including nectar sources for caterpillars, and also maintaining our landscapes in a way that we don't harm wildlife. Managing yard pests responsibly. So again, the way that we maintain our landscapes, getting out there and scouting our landscapes, following IPM, integrated pest management, scouting, correctly identifying, knowing and which insects are beneficial, which ones maybe are harmful, and if any action is necessary, knowing what action, and spot treating. Recycling yard waste is another principle, and so we can easily do that by, if we have trees that are losing their leaves, instead of raking up all of those leaves, just let those leaves stay under the tree and create a self-mulching area. When you mow your lawn, just leave your grass clippings on the lawn. There's no need to bag those up. There's no need to blow those into the street. That's actually illegal. Because think about those grass clippings. They have nutrients. When those grass clippings break down, if you leave them on your lawn, they're going to provide nutrients in the soil. When we leave them on the streets or blow them into the streets, they're going to go down storm drains. They're going to end up in bodies of water, which leads me into reducing stormwater runoff. And so here in Florida, the pollution associated with stormwater runoff is a huge water quality issue. And so we have lots of development, right? We have lots of buildings and homes and roofs, roadways, driveways. Many of these surfaces are impermeable, so water can't just filter through. It has to run off and find somewhere else to go to. Maybe that's a storm drain. Maybe that's a lake. And so we want to reduce that water and any pollutants or excess nutrients or chemicals that wash off with that. And so the ways that you can reduce stormwater runoff are directing your gutters or downspouts into your lawn or landscape areas, utilizing rain barrels to collect rainwater and then use on site, creating rain gardens, areas of swales or depressed areas that contain plants that thrive with that influx of water, but also when that dries out, because a rain garden should not hold water for more than 24 hours. So again, it's a very short time that that water's there. But again, you're channeling that water to a rain garden to help it from running off site. And then finally, we want to protect the waterfront. So we would encourage you to create a 10-foot maintenance-free zone around any body of water. So within that 10-foot maintenance zone, there's no fertilizing, there's no mowing, and there's no pesticide use. That way we protect that water. We create a buffer zone. Any nutrients that might end up, hopefully are taken up in that buffer zone. We utilize native shoreline plants to help buffer as well. That way we can protect the waterfront. And so those are the 9 principles of Florida-friendly landscaping. And here's just an image to kind of help you think about it. So we talked about these 9 principles, but what does that look like in your landscape? Well, I gave you some examples, but think about, utilizing right plant, right place. What's the most appropriate if you're installing a new plant or you need to replace the plant? What is the right plant for that place? How are you maintaining your plants? How are you fertilizing? How are you watering? What type of pest management are you using? Are you utilizing mulch in your landscape beds? Are you protecting the waterfront? Are you providing for wildlife with maybe a butterfly garden? And so all of these practices easily fit into our landscapes. And so now we're going to get into pruning. And this certainly follows, pruning is very much part of Florida-friendly landscaping and the 9 principles. And so we want to think about, why do we actually prune plants? We have plants and we want to maintain our landscapes, right? A Florida-friendly yard is maintained, but why are we pruning? Well, let me share this with you. This is kind of a large scale issue, but if we don't prune properly, or if we prune in ways that are harmful to plants, we can have serious consequences many years down the road potentially. And when we think about large trees, we certainly want to maintain them from when they're very young, and even as they mature, we want to keep them healthy. Because if we don't look for problems with those trees, we don't look for properly pruning them to keep them healthy, we could have huge failures with our trees down the road, and we could have very serious consequences. So why do we prune plants? Well, as we saw, maybe we need to improve the structural integrity of the plant. We want to keep those plants healthy. We want to make sure that they're safe in our yards, in our neighborhoods, in our parks, and around businesses. So we want to keep them pruned to keep them healthy. We can prune to remove any diseased or damaged or dead branches as well. That's another reason to prune. Maybe we've had a storm or some event happened and damaged that tree or that shrub. So we might need to do some pruning to help restore that plant. Maybe the plant's appearance has kind of gotten a little wily, or it just needs a little pruning would really enhance that. We could do some pruning. Maybe the plant needs a little bit of thinning to help with air circulation or light into the plant. Now, I'm not talking about pruning to allow light underneath the tree. If you have a tree and you're trying to grow turf grass under your tree, you're at a crossroad here. Many of our large shade trees do not allow enough light potentially under there. So we would encourage you to look for a shade tolerant alternative, maybe a shade tolerant ground cover instead of turf grass to grow under your tree. But when we're thinning to improve maybe air or light, that's for the plant itself. It's not necessarily for the turf grass underneath. Some of our plants, especially some trees, produce suckers, and so we might prune to remove those. Maybe we're starting with a very young plant, so we need to do some pruning as it grows to help create a nice structure for that plant. And then maybe we have a plant that is just a little too large for the space. So maybe we do need to maintain the size of that plant, and so we can prune then as well. Now, there are some improper pruning practices, and these are just a few photos to show you. You can see that photo on the top right there. We would call that lion tailing. It's been trimmed way too high. And so this can harm the plant when we prune them improperly. It can also cause the trees to not be as safe, not as stable. Additionally, the appearance of these plants does not look very great, and it could lead to early tree removal. That photo on the bottom right, that tree has what we call heading cuts. And we're going to talk a little bit more about heading cuts, but we would not recommend those on your trees. It's not healthy for the tree. Now, thinking about a proper pruning cut, I want to start off by saying, when you go to prune a branch on a tree, a flush cut is step one, not a right cut. That's an improper pruning cut. Before we take our pruners out or our handsaw out and make some cuts, we need to take a step back and examine the trunk and the branch or the branches that we're going to be pruning. Often you'll find with a healthy trunk and branch or branch and branch connection, you'll have a branch bark ridge. And so you can see in both photos, the branch bark ridge is that raised area of bark tissue that's in the crotch of where the trunk and the branch or two branches meet. It's can be darker than the surrounding bark, but again, it's a nice raised area. Now that you have heard of that term, when you start going around, start looking for that in your trees. Now, that's important to notice because then we know we have a nice, a healthy connection. The other thing to start noticing is the branch collar. This is crucial if we're going to be doing any pruning on our trees because we need to know where that branch collar is because we do not want to cut into the branch collar. And that's why a flush cut is not a proper cut. When we make a flush cut, we end up cutting into that branch collar. And so often this is a swollen area. And you can see in these two examples, the one on the right, the photo on the right, it's pretty obvious where that branch collar is. You see that nice swollen area. It's not as obvious on the photo on the left, but you still can kind of tell where it is. But in that branch collar, we have overlapping tissue. There's actually hormones and chemicals that we're going to talk about in a minute that help protect the tree when you make a cut or when something happens and that branch collar is kept intact. But going forward, if you're going to do any pruning, I want you to pay attention to that branch bark ridge and that branch collar on the tree and the branch. Now, trees don't heal themselves, but they can actually block decay from entering if they are pruned properly. And so they have what's called the branch protection zone. And so when we prune outside of that branch collar, we keep intact that tissue, those hormones, those chemicals that actually can block decay from entering. There's actually a theory that was developed by Dr. Alex Shigo, and it's called CODIT, compartmentalization of decay in trees. And so within that, that zone, we have the trees that are able to block decay. Again, if we keep that branch collar intact, we can actually stop decay from entering. So we can properly prune without causing further damage to our trees. Now, one thing I do want to mention, let's say you have a tree and that branch collar is not obvious at all. This diagram here is to help you decide how to properly prune a tree if you do not see that branch collar, if it's not obvious to you. So again, we talked about that branch bark ridge, that raised area in the crotch of the branch and the branch or the trunk and the branch. It's important that you learn to recognize that because if you can't see the branch collar, you're going to need to utilize that so that you can properly prune. So again, once you've recognized that branch bark ridge, And again, we're talking about a tree where that collar isn't visible. We don't know exactly where we should be cutting to keep that collar intact. What you want to do is from that branch bark ridge, you want to go out. You want to make a parallel line on the trunk. You can see that's the red line here. You want to measure the distance from your branch bark ridge to that imaginary parallel line that you've created. That distance, you're going to then go out from the edge, and that's going to be the point that you make the final cut to leave that branch collar intact. So again, we're looking for that branch bark ridge. Then we're making a parallel line from the top of the ridge on the trunk. We measure that distance, and then from that parallel line, we go out into the branch. That's about how far out you want to make that cut so that you can ensure you've done the best that you can to leave that collar intact and leave that tree or that branch healthy. Now, some other pruning tips for you. If you're pruning any branches that are larger than 1 inch in diameter, you want to utilize the multi-step method, the 3-step cut method. And so by utilizing this 3-step cut method, we again are able to protect that branch, protect that trunk. And so you make 3 cuts, and we'll go a little bit more into it. But you can see here, your first cut is actually an undercut. Then you go out a few inches more and make a slight cut on top. The branch actually breaks there. Had you not done that and you just tried to make the final proper cut at the trunk, if that branch was too heavy, what would have happened? It could have torn into the trunk, and then you've got a larger wound than is necessary. You've torn into that branch collar, which we're working so hard to keep intact. So I've got a few more pictures to try to help you understand the 3-step cut method. So again, our first cut, we're going to make a slight undercut, about 12 inches from the trunk. We just slightly cut into the branch. Next, we're going to go out a little bit further out, and we're going to make a cut on the top. And you can see in this photo here, what happened when we made that cut. It ripped into that branch. Again, if this was our final cut and we hadn't done this in multiple steps, we could have ripped into the trunk. We'd have ripped that branch collar, which we're working so hard to protect to keep our trees healthy. Once you've got that smaller branch to work with, then you could make your nice final cut, and you don't have to run the risk of that branch being too heavy and ripping into that branch collar. And here you can see, this is a great example. Not all branch collars are so obvious like this, but you can see that branch collar has been left intact. We've got a nice round cut. Here's some examples of larger branches that were cut and multiple steps were not used. What happened? Branch collar has been cut into. On the photo on the left, we have lots of damage on the bottom and top of where that cut was made. So again, we've opened the trunk up further. It's going to be potentially harder for that tree to block decay from entering, maybe from insects or disease or whatever it may be. So a little bit of effort on your part, making a proper cut. We'll also talk a little bit in a minute about hiring a professional as well. If a branch is absolutely too large for you to safely follow any of these methods, we would certainly encourage you to hire a certified arborist, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. But again, here's just some more photos. The branch collar has been left intact with this proper pruning method. We want to see nice round cuts of the branch from the branch collar. That's a good sign that we've made a nice good cut. What you'll see later on is that that cut will eventually kind of callus over, and then you'll get that wound wood, we call it, that starts forming. It kind of looks like a donut in that photo on the right. Those are all good signs that the tree is healthy and surviving and blocking decay from entering into the tree. One thing I want to mention, if you're making any cuts on your trees, we do not recommend using any of those pruning paints or those wound dressings. Again, maybe something happened to the tree that was outside of your control. It wasn't a cut. Certainly, even if it was a cut, There's no point in using these. People think this will help block anything from entering the tree, but often it could trap moisture under the tree and actually cause that spot to start decaying. So again, now that you know a little bit more about how trees handle injuries, even if it is proper prunes, it's better to let that tree deal with it than trying to paint it over. All right, so now we're going to talk about some types of pruning cuts that you might be making. The first type of cut is called a removal cut. So let's say you have a branch that you need to completely remove from the tree. You're going to prune back to the trunk or another parent branch. And so I know it's a little hard to see in these photos, but some of those branches have dotted lines. And so those would be branches that potentially you might be removing. There could be various reasons why you might need to remove a branch. It just could vary for each individual tree. But again, we're not making heading cuts. We're not cutting randomly along the branch. We're cutting back to the trunk or back to another branch along the tree. And we're following that same method of leaving any branch collars intact. Now you might also need to make a reduction cut. So maybe you have a branch that is starting to compete with the central leader of the tree. Maybe you've just got a branch that's a little out of balance and you need to reduce it. So a reduction cut shortens it, shortens the stem back to another stem along the branch. And I've got an example here. So you can see in this example, we actually start on the upper right photo. We're going to be making a reduction cut. That photo in the middle kind of focuses in on what's happening. And that bottom photo on the left is where that reduction cut has been made. So that branch has been reduced. So we've reduced it back to another limb along the branch. We didn't just come along and make some random cut. Again, when we cut near those formations, either next to another limb along the branch or the branch connecting to the trunk, again, there's tissue there, there's hormones and chemicals that allow that tree to handle that cut and deal with it. So these were just a few steps that you want to utilize when maintaining or pruning your trees. Now, I have to mention pruning crepe myrtles because there seems to be a huge misconception about what to do about crepe myrtles this time of year. Unfortunately, many people think this is the time of year, or if it's this time of year people do it, it's never a good time to do it, but people perform what we would call heading cuts, or many of us gardeners refer to it as crepe murder. So you'll see people have taken their crepe myrtle trees and completely cut off the tops. I'm not sure where this started, but it's actually not necessary at all. So let's take a step back and think about some things. One, we want to think about right plant, right place. Maybe you've gotten a tree that's too large. Maybe you should do some research ahead of time and know how large your crepe myrtle can get. There's many cultivars and varieties of crepe myrtles. Some can be anywhere from 10 feet tall. Some can be anywhere to 40 feet tall. So again, it goes back to the Florida-friendly landscaping principle of right plant, right place. Then we want to think about what is a proper pruning cut? Well, we've recommended heading cuts are not recommended for trees, right? They aren't beneficial. We're making cuts. We're allowing potentially decay to enter into the tree. So what happens? People do this every year. They cut back their crepe myrtle at a random spot. And then what has to happen? The branches have to grow back. Well, that branch, and you get many branches, right? Because the tree is stressed. You'll notice you've got multiple branches now coming out. And so the tree got stressed. It's growing lots of branches. Those branches don't have as strong a connection as the original branches did. So we've stressed the tree out. It's had to regrow, and they do regrow within one season, and you will get flowers. But you've done all of this work and it wasn't necessary. You could also shorten the length of your tree by doing this. Again, you're doing extra work that's not necessary. So I would encourage you to properly prune your crepe myrtle. This is a good time of year to do some pruning on your crepe myrtle, but we want to think about why are we pruning? Why did we say we want to prune? Maybe we've got some broken branches. Maybe we've got some crossing branches. Now is a good time, especially since our crepe myrtles are dormant. They're deciduous trees, they've lost their leaves. Think of them as a beautiful living sculpture this time of year. Now we can see all the branches. Now is a good time to make some proper pruning cuts. Maybe we need to make some removal cuts. Removal, not heading. Maybe we need to make some reduction cuts so that we have healthy branches that allow for good airflow, things like that, that have a nice form. Those are all reasons to prune, and we would be making removal cuts or reduction cuts. But again, this crepe murder or these heading cuts that are made are absolutely not necessary. And so again, you'll see many people doing it, and so you'll think, well, they're doing it, I should be doing it. Well, maybe learn a little bit more about it before you just jump in and start doing it as well. If you need any information on properly pruning your crepe myrtles, please feel free to reach out to our office. We'll have our information posted at the end of the program, and we'll also send some articles as well at the end. Here's just an example. This was a young crepe myrtle. And I just wanted to, I liked this photo because it was deciduous and there was a branch that was crossing. You can see here on the left photo, you've got some branches that are crossing. Well, we don't want branches rubbing and crossing. That could be a point of friction. I could see a nice branch collar on this little limb on this tree, could make a nice cut, and the tree could keep growing. So again, while it's deciduous, a good time to cut, it's a good time to look at the tree and see the different forms that we're looking for along the branches to make our proper cuts. I mentioned that we would encourage you, if you have any large trees or you're not comfortable with making proper cuts, I would encourage you to reach out and hire or contact for a consultation a certified arborist through ISA. This is an organization that certifies arborists. They go through training. They're very knowledgeable in all aspects of tree care and tree maintenance. They have appropriate experience or a degree to go along with that to know how to properly maintain trees and prune trees. They have to pass an exam. They live by a code of ethics that, you know, their work is for what's best for people and for trees and for the health of everyone. You can go to treesaregood.org and you can type in your zip code and find a local arborist, and you can ask them if you need any help with maintaining your trees. But we've talked about some proper pruning, and I would certainly encourage you for large trees to keep them healthy. If you have any questions about the safety of your tree, an ISA certified arborist is who you should be contacting for a consultation. All right, so that was trees. Now we're going to jump into pruning shrubs. A little bit about shrubs. Well, often with shrubs, we have fewer structural concerns, right? They're not as large potentially, so we don't have to be as worried about the structure. Shrubs often grow and flower very well without any pruning. So that's some good news. They can often be very low maintenance. Older shrubs might need a little bit of rejuvenation, and they might need removal if they do become damaged or diseased potentially. But often we're pruning shrubs to reduce the size or enhance the shape. And when I say shape, I don't mean making characters out of shrubs, but you know, keeping a nice natural form with the tree. A little bit of pruning goes a long way. Now, many shrubs can be low maintenance, but we want to remember the foundation of a Florida-friendly landscape, and that's right plant, right place. So again, dwarf Buford holly, maybe you want to look at how large that tree, or excuse me, that shrub gets before you install it. Again, that goes with any plant, any tree, any shrub. Look at the mature width and height of that plant. You can save yourself a lot of pruning if you space plants properly and you know ahead of time how large can they actually get. Now with shrubs, there might be some thinning that we need to do. Now maybe we could utilize this to enliven some older shrubs, maybe reduce the plant density, get some good airflow in there. Now this is going to be done best in late winter or early spring. So we're not quite there yet. We've just started February, so hang on a little bit longer. And you can do this every year as needed. And so you can see in these photos here, we've got a shrub. Maybe we've got some branches that we need to thin out. Again, we're going to talk about the pruning cuts, but we can follow those same principles for trees on our woody shrubs. So maybe we could do some removal or some reduction cuts to help improve the density of that shrub. Now, maybe you need to maintain the size of that shrub. We said often that's why shrubs are pruned. So again, you can make some reduction cuts, maybe on the lateral branches to reduce the size of that shrub. You want to cut the longest branches 6 to 24 inches back inside the outer edge of that plant. Now, another thing to consider with shrubs, you may need to make some heading cuts. That may be an appropriate cut. Maybe you've got a spot in the shrub that's just not filled in. You've got a hole. Well, when you make a heading cut, you get often many sprouts or branches on that branch. And so that could help you fill in that hole on that shrub. So again, it just depends what's the most appropriate cut for that shrub. And what are you trying to do as to what type of cut you're going to make. Now, thinking about where you're placing these cuts. Now, if you need to make a heading cut, again, a heading cut does not go back to another branch or stem or trunk. A heading cut is in between the branch. And again, you can see that photo on the top left. If we make a heading cut, a year later, that photo on the right, what do we have? We have many branches now. So if we were trying to fill in a space, a heading cut on a shrub might help us fill in that hole. Now, again, if we're trying to reduce size of that shrub, a thinning cut might be appropriate. So you can see the thinning cut goes back to another branch or bud along the stem. And 1 year later, the branches started to grow. Maybe we have a little bit of growth, but we're not getting that excess growth that a heading cut would give us. So again, just think about what are you trying to do with this shrub. Now, the angle of the cut is something you might need to do a little bit of practice to try to get the best technique. So you can see that branch on the left, you can see that little node. Again, you're just making a slight angle. You're keeping that bud from drying out. Now, if the angle is too deep, that bud may dry out and then it's not going to grow. Now, if you've left a stub too far away, potentially, that could lead that branch or that limb to rot. So again, just practice with that. Next time you're out there pruning, just try to follow the proper angle when making those cuts. Another thing about pruning your shrubs, if you have any large shrubs that maybe you're using as a hedge, or any shrub in general, even if it's a kind of a focal point, we want to prune our shrubs so that the base is actually wider than the top. So we want a slightly narrower top than the base. Why do we do that? Well, when we make straight cuts down the side of our shrubs, light cannot penetrate the lower branches and leaves. And so what happens is you get dieback on the base, and that photo on the right and on the bottom is what happens when over time we've constantly made straight cuts. We get dieback, the light can't reach the leaves on the lower branches, and so then you just get the trunk and then you've got a full top. If you enjoy that look, then continue on. But if you're trying to create some type of hedge or privacy and you'd like full coverage from top to bottom, adjust how you're pruning that shrub. Again, we're not talking about a pyramid, but we're talking about making a slight angle so that the base, if it's a formal hedge that you're hedging, but again, if it's not a formal hedge, either way, however you're going about pruning it, just prune so that the base is slightly wider so that those lower branches and leaves actually receive sunlight. Now, again, we talked about shrubs. Maybe you need to maintain size. Maybe you need to renovate a shrub. Maybe you've got a shrub that could really just, it's got a lot of the interior growth, has no leaves. Maybe it's just time. And so you can do a severe cut of the shrub and allow it to regrow. Now, you want to make sure that you properly prune. You want to do it at the right time as well. Again, if you're going to do this, you want to wait until very late winter, early spring, once we've past any chance of like frost, because again, you're going to have lots of new tender growth that could be susceptible to damage. Now, if you've got an evergreen, sometimes they don't handle this type of aggressive pruning. And so you may need to do this over a 3-year span where you'll do this a third at a time, then take another third and another third and slowly rejuvenate that shrub rather than one intense cutting back of that shrub. Again, that also gives you the chance to kind of maybe create a more natural or a better shape to that shrub as well. So if you're new to that, maybe do it in thirds at a time, just so you can see what's going to happen with that shrub. Now, pruning our trees and shrubs and timing. Well, most trees and shrubs can be lightly pruned any time of the year. Now, shrubs like azaleas or camellias that flower on last year's growth, you actually want to prune those in late spring after they finish flowering. A rule of thumb, just because it's an easy date to remember, is that we recommend that you prune your azaleas by July 4th. That's a date we all kind of recognize. That's because the growth after that is where they're going to flower. So if you decide to prune your azaleas maybe in December or January, you're probably not going to have a lot of flowers because you would have cut off all of the buds that were going to flower on last year's growth. So again, timing can be very important, especially on a plant like that, where we enjoy the winter flowers. Now, other shrubs that flower on new growth, while they're dormant, is a good time potentially to prune them. So again, think about your crepe myrtle or any plants that maybe aren't growing very actively right now. Now, structural pruning can be done anytime. One thing you do want to keep in mind with pruning is you don't want to prune right after a huge flush of new growth. That can be kind of stressful on the tree. So let's say you waited a little too late. You didn't quite get to it at the end of winter. Spring is in full force. It's just put out a lot of new growth. That's not a good time to do a lot of heavy pruning. A little light pruning would be fine, but you want to wait a little bit longer after that. And again, if timing is critical for flowering, you want to make sure that you follow those rules as well. Here's a guideline to kind of help you. So the column on the left, these are plants that you can do pruning while they're dormant. So think about your crepe myrtle, your hibiscus, your plumbago, your roses. Now, your winter or spring flowering shrubs, again, you wait till after they're done flowering. So again, for like azaleas, we said you want to be done with pruning those by July 4th. So again, you know, once they're done with their flowers, maybe in May or June, you get to pruning those, if not sooner. Your gardenia, a good rule of thumb is you have until about October to prune back your gardenia shrubs. Another type of plant that timing can be important is our ornamental grasses. We want to make sure that we prune those properly. Many of our ornamental, especially our native grasses, might be blooming in late fall, right? So if we prune those too early, we miss out on the chance to view those beautiful flowers like we just saw in that photo with muley grass. So some rules of thumb for pruning your ornamental grasses would be early spring, after any chance of frost. And if it is a deciduous grass, so it's a grass that goes brown in the winter, you actually want to cut it about 12 inches from the ground and let it regrow. Now, if it's and so this can be done in February or March here in Central Florida. Now, if you have an ornamental grass, potentially like muley grass, you could cut it back, but it doesn't go completely dormant. You could just rake the any dead leaves out. So instead of pruning it all the way back to 12 inches, you could get out a garden rake or a leaf rake or a pitchfork and actually just kind of comb through it and comb out some of those dead leaves. So again, whatever's most appropriate for your ornamental grass, you could cut it back. But again, if it's If it's an evergreen ornamental grass that really doesn't go dormant, but maybe you've just got some brown leaves, instead of cutting it, just consider kind of combing through those dead leaves. Another plant that I want to just briefly touch on, just to talk about properly pruning, are our palm trees. Now, palm trees should actually have a full 360-degree canopy. For many reasons, they don't. Either due to nutrient deficiencies or over pruning, they may not have that full canopy. But what we can help with both, certainly, but over pruning them is not beneficial. And so you can see in that diagram, a nice 360 canopy, that's great. If you did have to do some type of pruning, we don't recommend any pruning above the 9 to 3 horizon. Nothing above that. Even beyond that, we recommend not pruning anything that's not completely brown. If you have some palm fronds that are yellow, that could be a sign of a nutrient deficiency. And if you're constantly pruning those off and not correcting that deficiency, you're slowly just killing that palm tree, because what's happening is often, depending on what type of nutrient deficiency is, but you may see the older leaves, the trees at the base of the tree are on the canopy yellowing. You prune those off. What happens next? The lower leaves are yellow again. What's happening is that, again, depending on what type of nutrient deficiency it is, potentially those older mature leaves are taking the hit. They're saying, okay, I'm going to let these nutrients be available to the younger leaves. I'm going to let them thrive, but I'm going to take the hit. If you're constantly pruning those off and not fertilizing properly, eventually that tree is going to die because it didn't have enough nutrients. It didn't have the proper nutrients potentially. So again, I would encourage you to properly maintain your palms. If you see signs of a nutrient deficiency, we have information on proper fertilizer for palms. But back to pruning your palms. Again, a nice 360 canopy. We don't recommend removing anything unless it's completely dead on the fronds of the. Now, what you can prune at any time are the flowers or the fruit stalks. And I've heard it recommended before, if you don't want the fruit stalks, go ahead and just cut the flower stalk off before the fruit forms. When you think about it, that fruit stalk can be very heavy on some palms. So if you go ahead and just cut it while it's flowering, it's going to be a lot lighter. Now, maybe you want to leave the flower stalk a little bit for the pollinators, but before that fruit really starts forming, go ahead and cut that off if that was desired. It's not necessary, but if it's going to be messy or a problem in your landscape, you want to catch it ahead of time and make it a little easier on yourself. So again, be aware of nutrient deficiencies, keep your palms healthy, and avoid hurricane pruning. It doesn't benefit your tree at all. Again, the only fronds that need to be removed are the brown fronds. Pruning off healthy green fronds or even those yellow fronds do not benefit the palm tree. And finally, we're going to talk about pruning your annuals and perennials. And regarding your flowering annuals and perennials, think about deadheading them. It's not always necessary, but again, depending on what you're growing, it might help the look of the plant and it might help keep your annuals a little bit longer. So when we're deadheading flowers on our annuals and perennials, we're removing the spent flowers before they go to seed, because when we allow that plant to go to seed, it's telling the plant it's kind of end of life. I need to hurry up and produce lots of seeds because my life cycle is ending. Deadheading can also improve the appearance of many of our flowering annuals and perennials as well. It could encourage new growth on the plants. And like I said, it could prevent the plants from fading out too quickly. Again, when we stop the seed production, we can keep the plant going a little bit longer. Again, depending, mainly for your annuals on that. If you deadhead them, you'll stop them from going to seed and try to lengthen them a little bit longer for the season. Now, what should be deadheaded? Most of your annual flowers, again, to keep the nice appearance and to keep them a little bit longer, just go ahead and deadhead those flowers. Some of your flowering perennials, roses definitely benefit from deadheading, your salvias and your coreopsis potentially. Now, one thing I'll say, is if you want your native Coreopsis and your native Salvias to continue on, you need to leave some of those seeds so that they'll reseed themselves in the spring. But you could control that. You could prune some of those spent flowers or seed heads off, and you can leave some so that you'll know you'll have flowers there when they regrow. I want to briefly touch on pruning tools because we've talked about pruning, but what are some of the tools that you might utilize? Well, for small branches, think about your bypass hand pruners. Now, we recommend the bypass style. Those cross over each other rather than the anvil style that just kind of, and that's because the bypass make a nice clean cut. Anvil pruners actually just crush tissue. So you're not getting a nice clean cut. But again, think about smaller branches we're utilizing this on. If you've ever tried to make a cut, got your hand pruners out and then had your hand pruners hanging in the branch because it was too large, think twice. One, for your safety, again, to make a proper cut to keep the plant healthy, and two, for the longevity of your tools. So again, bypass hand pruners are going to be for your smaller branches. Now, you may be able to use loppers for branches. Again, just read, especially if you're purchasing a new one, they may go anywhere from 1 inch to up to 3 inches on the branch. So again, just use your best judgment on your tool and whether it's most appropriate. Often when we're getting to 1 inch and larger, you might want to consider your pruning saw. Now you can use a pole saw. Again, that's going to be for smaller branches though. And again, use extreme caution on that. Again, if you're having to reach stuff and it's unsafe, that's where you might want to consider hiring a certified arborist who can safely do that and properly do that for your safety and then for the health of your tree as well. We talked about shrubs. And so if you've got formal hedges, maybe hedge trimmers, whether manual or electric, may be appropriate. Again, you just want to remember with your shrubs, we're maintaining a wider base and a narrower top to allow sunlight in. If you have any pruning jobs that utilize a chainsaw, I would encourage you to follow all safety precautions, or again, consider hiring a certified arborist or professional to help you deal with that. But again, before you start pruning, think about which pruning tool is most appropriate, because you hate to grab the closest tool and then still have to make the walk out to the shed to get the right tool to get your other tool out of the branch. So a little extra effort will go a long way in pruning. The other thing you want to consider is maintaining your pruning tools. And so you want to keep them clean, keep them free from rust, just so that they'll function properly and for the longevity of those tools. So remove any soil or debris, again, before storing them. You want to think about disinfecting them potentially too if you have any issues with any diseases on your plants. And so you can easily disinfect. You can utilize a 25% solution of bleach, where you would use 1 part bleach to 3 parts water. You want to soak it for 5 to 10 minutes. You could also use a 50% solution of rubbing alcohol, and that would be 1 part alcohol to 1 part water, soak for 5 to 10 minutes as well. Now, if you are going to be using any of those disinfecting chemicals, make sure that you lubricate your tools after that. It can often be damaging to tools, so they may need some type of lubrication to keep them functioning properly, and keep your blades sharp as well. It's going to make your pruning cuts easier, and it's going to keep your plants healthier by making a nice clean cut rather than a pruning tool that doesn't quite cut. And then if you have to break it just a little bit, now you've got a bigger wound than was necessary on that branch or that trunk. So sharp tools, clean tools, it's going to make the job easier, keep you safe, and keep your plants healthy. We do have lots of resources based on everything we've talked about. We've got information on pruning your trees, proper pruning cuts, time of year to prune, information on your pruning your shrubs, your palms, your ornamental grasses, that 3-step cut method, deadheading your flowering plants, information on disinfecting your garden tools, more information on different garden tools and what they're most appropriate to use on. And of course, information on Florida-friendly landscaping was adapted from a basic pruning techniques training. So we talked about some water conservation opportunities with Lakeland Water Utilities, which we'll have Brittany come up in just a minute and reiterate those opportunities. We talked about the 9 principles of Florida-friendly landscaping and just how we can maintain our landscapes and maintain them in a way that they're beautiful, but that they also conserve and protect our natural resources, particularly our water resources here in Florida. Again, we want to prune to keep our plants healthy, to maintain them. We want to make sure that we're utilizing proper pruning cuts for healthy plants. Think about the timing on the different types of plants, and then also consider maintaining your pruning tools regularly, whether that's cleaning them, disinfecting them, or sharpening them. Brittany, do you want to come up and just mention a couple things?
Once again, just to reiterate, and for those who are online and may have joined us a little late, there are many different conservation programs that we offer. There's toilet rebates, conservation kits that are free, and also we can help you with the landscaping and irrigation part of your home. So if there's any of that stuff that you have questions about, possibly want to look into some rebates, things of those natures, just let me know. Again, for those who are here, I have a brochure on the table on your way out if you wanted to grab one. My information is on the back. For those online, you can obviously, you see on the screen my email, my phone number, and also the website for the city. So any of those sources, you can get a hold of me. I can help you in any way possible. And if you are not within City of Lakeland limits, so like you pay water to Polk County, for example, they also offer programs very similar to this. That is also where you can go to find out the information I was just mentioning for the county residents or those who pay water elsewhere, not City of Lakeland. So very much, I want to say thank you to Julie. Thank you to the Master Gardeners for helping us out today and for doing the presentation. We do appreciate our partnership with them.
So much for joining us in person or online. We appreciate your time today. If you have any questions about anything you heard today, please feel free to reach out to UF-IFAS Extension Polk County. You can call us, email us, visit our website, or follow us on social media at Polk Gardening. Again, thank you to City of Lakeland Water Utilities. We appreciate your support of Florida-friendly landscaping and helping to sponsor today's Lunch and Learn.